and thank you for inviting me to address the Interparliamentary Conference. For many years, I was a parliamentarian myself, and I know how decisive and important your voices are. So it really is a pleasure to join you all today. Let me also take this opportunity to thank Portugal, a staunch NATO ally and a committed European Union member. You contribute to our shared security and to our collective defense in many different ways. Portuguese jets and ships are part of our air policing missions and our maritime operations. Portuguese forces take part in our multinational brigade in Romania. And you host a number of different NATO facilities, including our cutting-edge cyber academy. You are also a lead and host nation for exercise Steadfast Defender 2021 later this year. This is an important defensive NATO exercise which will demonstrate alliance readiness and transatlantic solidarity. Portugal is also a champion of strong NATO-EU relations. My address to you today is a testimony to that. The Portuguese EU presidency has made strengthening transatlantic relations one of its priorities, and I strongly welcome this. Because strong transatlantic relations are the only way for our countries to address the great challenges of today and tomorrow. Russia's destabilizing behavior, brutal forms of terrorism in our neighborhood, sophisticated cyber attacks, disruptive technologies, the rise of China, the security implications of climate change, and a health pandemic. All of these challenges are far greater than any of us can address alone. In recent years, we have lifted NATO-EU cooperation to unprecedented levels. We are working side by side in many areas, helping to stabilize our neighborhood in the Western Balkans, dealing with illegal migration in the Aegean, and addressing a range of hybrid threats from cyber attacks to disinformation campaigns. But we can do even more together to bolster our resilience, champion new technologies, combat climate change, and protect the rules-based order. It makes sense for NATO and the EU to join forces. As I have stated many times, I welcome EU efforts on defense and the fullest possible involvement of non-EU allies in PESCO and the European Defence Fund. I also welcome the recent US decision to join the project on military mobility, which is a flagship of NATO-EU cooperation. This can enable US and other NATO troops and equipment to move faster across Europe, for instance, to reinforce our NATO battle groups in the Baltic Sea region. A European Union that spends more on defense and new capabilities, and that reduces the fragmentation of the European defense industry, is not only good for European security, it is also good for transatlantic security. But European unity cannot replace transatlantic unity. And the European Union cannot defend Europe alone. More than 90% of EU citizens live in a NATO country. But EU members provide only 20% of NATO's defense spending. Canada and the United Kingdom link together both sides of the Atlantic. All of these countries are critical for the defense of Europe. And most of all, it is about politics. Any attempt to divide Europe from North America will weaken NATO, but it will also divide Europe. Only a strong NATO can keep our almost 1 billion people safe in a more dangerous world. So I do not believe in Europe alone or North America alone. I believe in Europe and North America together, in NATO, in strategic solidarity. There is no denying that in recent years, serious questions have been asked on both sides of the Atlantic about the strength of our bond. And we have seen competing visions of transatlantic relations. But now, we have a unique opportunity to open a new chapter in our relations. I welcome President Biden's clear message on rebuilding alliances and strengthening NATO. We all have a responsibility to seize this opportunity. That is why we launched the NATO 2030 initiative, aimed at making our alliance even stronger for the future. I have engaged with parliamentarians as well as independent experts, civil society, and young people to provide inputs for an ambitious and forward-looking agenda for NATO leaders when they meet at our summit in Brussels later this year. Let me briefly set out what I see as the main priorities for NATO 2030. First, we must reinforce the unity between Europe and North America. Our unity derives from our promise to defend each other. The time has come to update NATO's strategic concept so that we can chart a common course going forward and reaffirm the fundamentals of our alliance. We must also strengthen our commitment to collective defense and fund more of deterrence and defense on NATO territory together. And we must strengthen our political unity, using NATO even more as the unique platform that brings Europe and North America together every day to consult on all issues that affect our security. Second, we must broaden our approach to security so that we address the full spectrum of threats. For this, we need strong militaries, but also strong, resilient societies, and more investment in innovation to maintain our technological edge and remain competitive in a more competitive world. Lastly, we must safeguard the international rules-based order, which is being challenged by authoritarian powers. The rise of China offers opportunities, for instance, for our economies, but it also poses challenges for our security and way of life. That is why we should deepen our partnerships with countries like Australia and Japan and reach out to other like-minded nations around the world. Protecting the rules-based order starts with protecting our values at home. So we ourselves must recommit to our values, strengthen our democracies, and protect our institutions. As members of Parliament, you can help reinforce the ties between Europe and North America. You can help shape a bold new transatlantic agenda. And you can help push for more ambitious and practical joint efforts between NATO and the European Union. Strengthening transatlantic relations and working hand in hand is the right thing to do. Now is the right time to do it. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado, Sr. Secretário-Geral da NATO. Vamos passar a uma fase diferente do debate. Vamos ter dois co-moderadores, o Sr. Presidente da Comissão de Defesa do Parlamento Português, Marcos Pestrelo, e o Sr. Presidente David McAllister, do Parlamento Europeu. Dou a palavra a este último, por favor.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, for your intervention. It was good to hear your words, especially on EU-NATO partnership, because we have often discussed this. This partnership is key to contribute to peace and security in Europe and in the world. An enhanced cooperation and coordination between the European Union and NATO will allow us to build, as you said, a common complementary approach to current and future regional and global security challenges, as well as to conflict situations. Before I open the floor to the delegates from the national parliaments and the European Parliament, let me just briefly share a few very clear points of order to allow a smooth debate, and I'm doing this also on behalf of Chairman Perestrello. The list of speakers has been circulated by the Conference Secretariat on the basis of the requests for the floor we have received. As usual, we will alternate 2 members of the national parliaments and 1 member of the European Parliament. As communicated by the Conference Secretariat, each intervention should be limited to 1 minute maximum. I ask you to respect the time allocated. All over Europe, 1 minute is exactly 60 seconds. If time is not respected, your microphone might be disconnected. I will always announce the next 2 speakers so that you are prepared when it's your turn. In this framework, we can hopefully have a broad and lively exchange, as many of you as possible being able to take the floor. And we kick off the debate now with the first speaker, and that is Joël Guerriau from France, and after that, Roberta Pinotti from Italy.
Oui, Messieurs les Présidents, Monsieur le Secrétaire-Général.
Chair, Secretary-General, dear colleagues, we're very pleased with this meeting with Mr. Stoltenberg because it refers to the multilateralism by the administration for the last 20 years. The EU has collaborated militarily and politically with the US, so you have to clarify the relationship between allies and not tolerate intolerable. For instance, Turkey is threatening our ally and is associated to Russia in missiles, and the EU was a mediator between Greece and Turkey. So what can we do so that Turkey becomes an ally? We Europeans should invest in the strategic compass. It will need the connection between European defense and NATO, and favoring a concerted action of our capabilities. The greatest, higher implication of the NATO in the Sahel region will be an intervention of an exemplary nature. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Guerriau. Next speaker is...
Thank you very much, Mr. Guerriau.
The Senato della Repubblica, and afterwards I will give the floor to Paolo Rangel from the European Parliament.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the Portuguese presidency for organizing this important opportunity for an exchange of views. I will get to the matter at hand immediately. With Mr. Biden, the US is back. Europe is happy about that, and we also in Italy, we are happy about it. We are happy as NATO member countries because we believe this relationship is an alliance that has values, that is based on values and is strategic for the world. Now, this said, of course, we as Europeans must do our part. Even before Trump, with Obama, we heard the same things that we heard here from Mr. Stoltenberg, that Europe should do its bit of burden sharing, and that's important, that's essential. And if we want to be a geostrategic player, an all-round geostrategic player, we need to have our own.
Okay, thank you, Madam Pinotti. I have been informed that I should immediately give the floor now to Lara Martinho from the Richard School. Miss Martinho.
Muito obrigada. Cumprimentos.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome the Secretary-General of NATO and all colleagues. And as regards one of the recommendations of the report of the working group NATO 2030, closer to the south, to look at traditional threats of terrorism and the growing presence of Russia and China. Multiple challenges, especially in the Gulf of Guinea, problems in terms of maritime security. In 2020, more than 90% of the cases of piracy. So we have to increase cooperation for maritime safety in the south to guarantee safety of shipping. And the Azores are strategically located in the center of the Atlantic as a center for maritime safety, can contribute to this end. Question: how can the European Union and NATO cooperate to guarantee more maritime safety, and especially what role can the Azores and Portugal play in that field? Thank you.
Obrigado. Next is Richard Scholes from Latvia, and then Tonino Pizzula from the European Parliament.
Thank you, chairs. Thank you, Mr. Stoltenberg, for being here with us today. Well, I'll be very short, and it's still 1 minute is less. So, in the broadest sense, the debate about EU strategic autonomy is a debate that is irrevocably tied with the debate on the NATO 2030 strategy. It comes down to NATO and EU's resilience, our first line of defense, which demands political cohesion, especially in these challenging geopolitical times. Considering past and present rifts within the alliance, how do you view the future architecture of NATO? And how can we reinforce throughout the alliance that building alliances or heavily cooperating with aggressors on defense purchases or strategic infrastructure is against our common interests, and overcome unproductive and at times dangerous deadlocks in our decision-making processes? And to conclude on the strategy, would it be essentially the same NATO or a reimagined one? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kuhl. Now Tonino Pizzula, and then Mr. Flüger from the German Bundestag. Tonino.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. Thanks go, of course, to our Portuguese hosts. Mr. Secretary-General, we entered 2021 with a new US administration and the US President with a proven transatlantic track record. Now we need to rebuild this partnership under new circumstances and by acting together where possible. This is why I also believe EU's active engagement should be encouraged. EU strategic autonomy is complementary and not contradictory with transatlantic relations. This pandemic has definitely showed us that security goes beyond military, and so does strategic autonomy. Therefore, I have two questions. How can we enhance EU-NATO cooperation in strategically important regions such as Western Balkans, especially in ongoing pandemic disinformation campaigns which seek to undermine us? And how can we achieve more cooperation on topics such as artificial intelligence and data in order to gain more efficiency to tackle potential new security threats?
Thank you, dear Nino. Now I give the floor to Tobias Flüger, and then afterwards Ilka Kaner will be ready. Unfortunately, Tobias Flüger obviously can't be connected, so Ilka Kaner, the floor is yours. Now, I'm not sure if anyone who has technical difficulties, but also we couldn't hear and see Ilka Kanerva. So I'll move on in the meantime and give the floor to Nathalie Loiseau, the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Security and Defence in the European Parliament. Nathalie, vous avez la parole.
Merci, cher David.
Thanks, David. Thank you, Secretary General. I've listened to you with great attention, and I've heard several of our recent interventions, and I question myself with the new Biden administration. He said clearly that European Union is not a competitor because we consider the EU as the first partner. When I heard you say recently that we should to prevent a competitive agenda, so the EU has to defend itself, I don't really understand, and there is a sort of a challenge. Could you please confirm that we are all thoroughly committed in a positive agenda? Could you also confirm that you realize the challenge that Turkey represents for Europe? Thank you very much.
Merci, Nathalie. Next speaker is from the Croatian Parliament, Ante Bacic. Please.
Chairman, dear colleagues, especially our host in Portugal, Mr. Secretary General, greetings from Croatia. The European Union and the NATO are currently in the process of drafting strategic documents that will define their future development in the field of security and defense. The EU is developing a strategic compass, while NATO is in the process of strategic reflection. How do you think these documents will influence the development of EU-NATO cooperation? And how do you see further cooperation of the development of defense capabilities, especially through innovation and the development of disruptive technologies? Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Perestrello, I will now hand over to you to run the second half of our discussion. Once again, we tried to connect Paolo Rangel, Tobias Pfluger, and Ilka Kanerva. Perhaps you could try again in the second round, but I understand that now we do a first break and we give the floor back to our NATO Secretary-General. So, Mr. Perestrello, the conference is in your hands.
Muito obrigado, David.
Thank you, David. I will try and manage the meeting as efficiently as it's been done so far and try to recover some of those who were unable to connect. I will now hand over the floor to Marko Mikkelsen of the Estonian Parliament.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, General Secretary. This was excellent overview of current status of those challenges we have here in Europe on transatlantic base. But my question to you is, there is very important for us as politicians, how do we tell to our people here in Estonia or people in France or in America or some other places that we need to invest constantly to our common defense, to NATO, to EU efforts at a time when we have so many multiple challenges. But at a time when we hear that the top politicians talk about that NATO is obsolete or brain dead or is not anymore pertinent, this really puzzles me. How do we get this support from people? So my question is to you, if you have sort of imaginary meeting in coming weeks in some small French town, what you could tell to those people why we need NATO today?
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. Now I will hand over the floor to Reinhard Bütikofer from the European Parliament. And after that, Mr. Titus Korlatian from the Romanian Senate.
Thank you, host. President Rodriguez called the United States a friend we cannot do without, and the Secretary General has said that strong transatlantic relations are the only way of tackling the challenges. I agree with that. That's why I think we should be wary of those voices that warn us in the pursuit of their dreams of autonomy, warn us against forming a bloc with the United States on global policies. I think we should indeed form a united front, a phalanx of allies, but of course within that phalanx there has to be partnership in leadership. And we must carry a bigger part of the burden to defend the security of Europe, we must certainly become more efficient and overcome fragmentation, as the Secretary General has said. We're presently spending 3 times the amount of money than the Russians are and not getting enough bang for the buck.
Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Member of Parliament. Now I give the floor to Titus Corlatian from the Romanian Senate, and please be prepared, Konstantinos Giolekis from Greece.
Mr. President, bon dias, Secretary General, colleagues. My points on the discussion today refers to the need of having a more in-depth coordination between NATO and the EU. And I think the pandemic showed us that the EU must consolidate its resilience through inter alia cooperation with its allies, first of all, NATO. And now with the new US administration, we have indeed a positive framework. Both NATO and the EU embarked on a reflection process regarding their future. We have on one hand the NATO 2030, and I congratulate the Secretary General for its relentless efforts to consolidate the alliance, and we should work more in the alliance to increase the security of its allies, especially on the eastern flank. On the other side, we have at EU level the strategic compass. My plea today is for ensuring coherence between the processes. We need to have both a strong NATO and an efficient European Union, and not to create duplication and competition. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Deputado. Tem a palavra o Sr. Deputado.
Thank you. Now, Konstantinos Giolekis, Member of Parliament, and after that, Mavridis Kostas from the European Parliament.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon from Greece. Greece believes that a new era is dawning following the new US administration in the relationship between EU and NATO. But the question is, what type of initiatives will be formed in order to make Turkey comply to our common values, since Turkey is violating international law and is threatening with war members of the EU and NATO, such as Greece and Cyprus. Turkey, which instrumentalizes the migrants, Turkey which is behaving, flirting with jihadists, Turkey which buys armaments from non-members of NATO. We would like to see how the alliance will deal with these issues, which are issues for the EU as well. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Mavridis from the European Parliament, and after that, Andrius Mazuronis from Lithuania.
It's very important that we have this exchange of views. We face same threats and same adversaries, while at the same time we share same values and interests. As far as Turkey, besides its domestic situation, I don't know if you can see me. Do you see me? Okay. The Erdogan regime is actually an ally of our adversaries, be it Russia, the Islamic State, in the Mediterranean. It's always against our interests and values. My question is very simple, and in a way it's very personal to the Secretary General. He has been very favorable for Turkey and the Erdogan regime. And I want him to remind him what President Macron has stated about Turkey, and also that the Trump administration is over. We have a new administration, and we have to defend our interests.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Member of Parliament. I will now give the floor to Andrius Mazuronis from Lithuania, and after that, to Plamen Manushev of Bulgaria.
Secretary-General, for your speech. Actually, it was very interesting, and I could sign under every word you have said. You have mentioned some of the security threats coming from the east. You've mentioned Russia, China. I'm sure there's many more like Belarus. We see the situation in Armenia. We see what's happening in Sakartvelo and so on and so on. That's why the cooperation between European Union and NATO is crucial. And there should be effort put towards having better common result, but not to somehow duplicate each other or to try to take over some of the functions from one institutional body to another. So my question to you would be, do you see the threat that while European Union will develop its own security policies further and further, do you see the threat that the transatlantic link or link with UK in security field can get weaker and weaker every day?
Muito obrigado, Sr. Deputado.
Thank you. I am told that Mr. Manouchev is not being able to connect. So I'll give you the floor to Uzola Zolekis from the European Parliament.
Statement and for leadership. I see the EU-NATO cooperation as a paramount foundation that can make Europe safer. But at the same time, how to grow European defense capabilities must not duplicate the efforts of NATO in the collective defense domain. We must develop coherent and complementary collaboration on a range of different initiatives. With this in mind, we also need to ensure that EU's defense planning is working properly. Today, the EU's lack of thorough threat analysis that would aggregate the security risk from the commerce of the continent. The strategic compass should fill this gap by emphasizing the security challenges that are faced by the EU daily. Such an exercise will help to develop tailor-made policies in response to existing and emerging threats. Thanks.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. Member of Parliament, now Ana Maria Botella from Spain. And after that, Tobias Elwood from the UK.
Gracias. Mi reconocimiento, General Stoltenberg, a su impulso modernizador de la OTAN, nuevo concepto estratégico, visión OTAN 2030, incluida la reciente cumbre de la juventud celebrada en la Conferencia de Seguridad de Múnich. Modernización e innovación que son imprescindibles, porque las amenazas del siglo XXI no las combaten ya tanques y misiles, como demuestran las amenazas híbridas que atentan contra nuestra sociedad.
Shown by the hybrid threats against our democratic societies. Two issues within this strategic path. I'm the chairperson of the Home Affairs Committee of the Spanish Parliament, and I've been Secretary of State for Security. What's going to be the role of internal security in the new NATO 2030 as regards your goal to reinforce allied resilience? Is the NATO going to involve the Home Affairs ministers, those close in the virtuous circle of security, defense, foreign affairs and home affairs? Second issue, Spain is the southern border of Europe with Africa. The southern flank of NATO is a...
Obrigado, senhora deputada. Tenho informação de que o senhor Tobias Elwood não está presente.
I've been told that Mr. Tobias Elwood is not present, so I'll give the floor to Zlot Hemet of Hungary.
Que aparentemente também...
No, we do have Nemeth Zlot.
Yes, we do.
Okay. I would like to ask you, Secretary General, about your opinion concerning the proposal to establish a center for democratic resilience. This idea came up recently in the reflection group headed by two prominent politicians. And we had an interesting discussion in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and our president said that President Trump's problematic final period of his presidency showed that the Democratic Resilience Center is needed. How could this Democratic Resilience Center help the United States in fighting these kind of challenges? What about that? Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Deputado. Tem a palavra.
Thank you. Now, Kasper Plazinski from Poland. And after that, we give 30 seconds to Roberta Pinotti from Italy.
So, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, thank you for mentioning that Russia is one of our main dangers for our security in Europe. But I would like your reflection towards the security policy, towards the development of Russian strategic infrastructure on the Baltic Sea. For example, like pipeline Nord Stream 2. Isn't like invitation for Russian troops and tactical weapons more and more towards our borders? Like my friend from Lithuania told, we are the first line of defense toward these problems, and we are very much. We have the opinion that we should all stay hand to hand and have the same.
Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado, senhor.
Thank you, Member of Parliament. 30 seconds, last speaker, Roberta Pinotti.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much. I was saying that over the last few years we have worked a lot, European Union and NATO together, in order to work on defense in a situation of complementarity. We shouldn't be afraid of a stronger European defense because it becomes an important asset for NATO. So I'll say, let's continue our cooperation in the missions. And I must say that there is an important EU mission, IRINI, which I believe can be a lot stronger through a closer cooperation with NATO. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Roberta.
Thank you, Roberta. Once the interventions of the parliamentarians are over, I'm now giving the floor to Secretary-General of NATO, and I would like to thank him for his availability to participate in this meeting. Secretary-General, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you so much. Many thanks for your questions and your comments. This is very useful for me, and I think it's important for NATO to have this kind of direct change, and for me as Secretary General to have direct exchanges with you as parliamentarians. I think the best thing I can do now is not to go through the whole list of questions, because many of them actually address the same issues in slightly different ways, but try to group them and to address the main topics you have raised in different ways. First, many of you raised issues related to NATO-EU cooperation and also European or EU efforts on defense. I am a strong supporter of a stronger and improved and enhanced cooperation between NATO and the European Union. And one of the things I really appreciate or value is that over the last years we have been able to lift the cooperation between the European Union and NATO to unprecedented levels. We have never worked so closely together on a wide range of areas as we do today. But of course we cannot be complacent. We need to look into how we can do even more. And one of the aims with NATO 2030 is also to look into how can we further strengthen cooperation between the European Union and NATO, for instance, in areas related to resilience. Resilience of our civil societies is of great importance for our military defense. We need to make sure that we have infrastructure, telecommunications, roads, airports, undersea cables that are functioning, safe and secure in peace, but also in crisis and conflict. And we know that our adversaries, they are not only using military tools, but they are using political tools, economic tools to undermine our societies. And we cannot have strong defense without having strong societies. So that is, for instance, an area where there is a huge potential for doing more together with the European Union. And neither the European Union nor NATO has all the tools we need to address these challenges, but together we can really make a difference. I also think that the maritime domain is an area where we can do more together. We have worked together in fighting piracy. One of the questions was about piracy, and NATO and the European Union, we work together in addressing piracy off the Horn of Africa. Of course, potentially we can do that again if the political will is in place, both in Europe or in the European Union and in NATO. We have something called the NATO Operation Sea Guardian, which is operating in the Mediterranean. It provided support to the previous EU mission there of Operation Sophia, and we are now looking into the potential working together with the current Operation Irene. So cyber, many other areas where we can work together, and I would champion, continue to support this. And I met the European Council last week, and I met the College of Commissioners some weeks ago, and I meet a lot of European leaders. And of course, in all those meetings, we sit together and look into how can we do more together. But this is not only something we can decide here in Brussels. We need the support from member states in the European Union, from NATO allies. So we also need the strong support from parliaments to make sure that we further strengthen NATO-EU cooperation. NATO and the EU are, of course, two different organizations, but we share the same neighborhood. We share many of the same threats and challenges. EU is, of course, working on economic issues, climate, many other issues where NATO is not playing a lead role, and then NATO has the main responsibility for the security, defense, collective defense of all NATO allies in both Europe and in North America. So my main message on European EU cooperation: yes, we should do more, and we are constantly looking into how we can step up that cooperation. Then on EU efforts on defense, and there were several questions also related to the phrase strategic autonomy. Well, I think strategic autonomy is something which is understood in different ways. So what matters for me is that as long as EU efforts on defense complement NATO, I'm absolutely in favor. But we need to avoid duplications, and we need to avoid competition. This is important also because perception matters. So we must avoid the perception that EU can defend Europe, because EU cannot defend Europe. Partly because, as I said, 90% of the people, or actually more than 90% of the people living in the European Union, they live in a NATO country. But only 20% of our defense spending comes from EU allies. So there is no way we have the resources within the European Union to defend Europe. And it's also about geography. I mentioned Norway, Iceland in the north, Turkey in the south, and of course in the west, Canada, United States, and United Kingdom. All these countries, non-EU members, they are all important for the defense of Europe. But most importantly, again, as I said in my intervention, if we start to weaken the bond and leave the perception that we can defend Europe without North America and non-EU allies, then we are not only weakening the transatlantic bond, weakening NATO, but we are dividing Europe. So that will be not good for Europe, not good for EU, and not good for NATO. So I believe in strategic solidarity, that we work together. And I think that we have to remember that for centuries, conflict was a constant companion in Europe. And one of the main reasons why we established NATO after the Second World War was to prevent new wars from taking place in Europe. And NATO has helped to preserve the peace for more than 70 years, and by delivering security, by preserving peace in Europe, NATO has been key for European integration, for enlargement of the European Union. So a strong NATO actually facilitates and helps European integration. But that has to be understood, because a strong NATO, strong transatlantic bond, is important for Europe, is important for the United States, not least in the light of all the new challenges we now see. Terrorism, it's not something we can address either as Europe or as North America. We need to have North America and Europe working together in NATO. We have seen that in the fight against international terrorism in Afghanistan after the attack on the United States, 9/11, but also seen North America and Europe and NATO being part of that, liberating the territories that ISIS controlled in Iraq and Syria. It was not US alone, it was not Europe alone, it was North America and Europe together, and of course working with the Iraqi security forces and other forces in the region, helping to liberate the territories that ISIS controlled in Iraq and Syria. The rise of China makes it important that Europe and North America stand together in NATO. China has the second largest economy in the world, soon the largest economy in the world, the biggest defense budget, leading in technology. Neither Europe nor North America will manage that alone. So if anything, the rise of China just makes NATO even more important, because size matters when it comes to security, especially when we address the global challenges related to the shifting balance of power. And so on with all the other challenges, we need to stand together. There was several questions on NATO and Turkey. You are absolutely right that there are disagreements and differences. You can see them in the public, also in newspapers and the media almost every day. And there's no way to hide that. I have raised my concerns myself about the Eastern Mediterranean, the consequences of the Turkish decision to acquire the Russian air defense system S-400, the migration situation, and so on. And I think that NATO also actually provides an important platform for when there are differences between allies, that we sit down and have open discussions about these differences, and we have open exchanges where allies also raise their concerns and express their views on all these difficult and sensitive issues. And I have expressed my concerns myself, not only in Brussels but also in Ankara. But I think the important thing is to understand that at the same time as many allies are concerned and have expressed their views also at NATO meetings several times, we need to realize that Turkey is an important ally. The fight against ISIS, Daesh, Turkey played a very important role. We used bases, infrastructure in Turkey to defeat Daesh or to liberate the territories just south of the border of Turkey in Iraq and Syria. No other NATO ally have suffered more terrorist attacks than Turkey. And Turkey hosts millions, 4 million refugees. So we have to work with Turkey to address many of these issues. And that's exactly what we do. So the challenge is in a way to understand the differences, understand the concern that many allies express, but at the same time try to find ways forward where we can try to reduce tensions, work together, and find some positive steps in the right direction. And that's exactly what we try to do at NATO. So for instance, I welcome the fact that despite differences, we have been able to maintain the NATO Aegean presence, the presence of NATO ships in the Aegean, helping to bring Turkey and the European Union, Frontex, Greece together, addressing the migrant and refugee crisis in the Aegean. This is an ongoing activity. It has been a German-led activity for some time with the German flagship, but the NATO presence in the Aegean helps to address the migrant and refugee crisis and is one important step in the right direction. We have also been able to establish what we call a deconfliction mechanism here at NATO with military experts to prevent any incidents and accidents in the Eastern Med, because we have seen more military presence of Turkey and of Greece. We actually saw back in the 1990s, where we had some similar kind of tensions, that led to casualties, to downing of planes and really dangerous situations. We need to prevent that from happening again, and therefore we've been able to establish this mechanism of communications, military experts sitting down and reducing the risks for incidents and accidents in the
I would
Aegean.
like to ask you if you please could conclude, please.
Okay. Then I will just conclude by saying that we strongly believe that NATO 2030 is the best way to shape an agenda for NATO for the future, including working with the European Union, but also making sure that the most successful alliance in history remains strong and agile, as we've been for more than 70 years.
It was a beautiful ending. Thank you very much, Mr. Stoltenberg, for your participation in this forum. Caros colegas, nós vamos fazer uma...
Colleagues, we're going to break for 1 minute only. Please stay connected. I thank David McAllister for having co-chaired this panel. We're going to the next channel and we just ask for 1 minute break. See you soon. Ouh là là. Portanto, agora